everybody. Really, really appreciate it. If I get into the thank yous too heavily, I'll start crying. So, yeah, it's been a wonderful year to say the least. So I've got my comfort blanket with me, just in case I start breaking down, okay? So, it's actually been an incredibly crazy week or two. Some of you know, but not many, that we just moved last week. Celebrated Thanksgiving and prepared for this event. And actually tried to run a business. So, I figure with everything going on in the news and everything else that's happening, I just think, forget about the agenda. We'll just talk about groping allegations.
Can I volunteer, Jordan?
Is there a button that
I'll go first.
You're my model.
Thank you.
All right, I guess not. I actually don't know anything about that. But, so here's what we're going to do. I'll share my experience, my perspective, if you will, on what I perceive to be workplace conflict, conflict resolution, and we have some wonderful experts here that will give their opinions, and I've asked them to prepare to answer a question, and that'll help to round out the field. And if we have time, we'll do a Q&A. Let people come and go. If you want to grab a drink while we're doing this, feel free to. Want to grab food, do it. And we do also have a little pop quiz at the end. So you better pay attention. Actually, the pop quiz has very little to do with exactly what I'm going to talk about. But there is a very special gift that someone is going to win. So, if you're hanging around, that might help, but it's okay. So, to start things off, I'm going to talk about a subject that I've been observing for years and, writing about a little bit more recently. And simply put, one of the things I've wondered a lot about is why it's so hard for us to be ourselves at work. I realize that a lot of the people I deal with, both candidates and clients, tend to try to be someone else or something else. Whether they're going to an interview, whether they're interviewing, or whether they're on the job itself. And I see and hear, especially since I moved to this neighborhood about 8-9 years ago, so many people doing what I'll call personally fulfilling work on themselves, and not necessarily being able to transfer that positive energy into the workplace. And that's really a big part of my message. My objective is to provide some understanding about how we can take that goodness, if you will, that mindfulness into your job search, into your job, whether you're a candidate, whether you're a client, whether you're an employee, an employer, whether you're just starting out, or whether you're running your own company. The sometimes chilling reality of my job is that we listen to candidates and clients complain about one another all the time. I have a courtside seat, if you will, to get in touch with the challenges between the two parties. So the subject is acute to me. It's part of my job, always has been, always will be. I understand that. But I'd say a lot of the back and forth that I've been exposed to the last couple of years has taken on a little bit of a different tenor, different color, if you will. Seems like there's much more of a focus these days on a divide between generations. Millennials are definitely disillusioned by a majority of the Gen Xers and baby boomers they work for. And frankly, a lot of the boomers I talk to, most of the clients, are pretty disappointed with what they perceive to be a poor attitude, poor work ethic on the part of the Gen Yers and millennials. Does the term entitlement ring any bells? Now, so here's what I see. I think both sides, factions, parties, whatever you want to call it, maybe even plaintiffs, they're using this, what I call generational dissonance, as a pretty convenient excuse. I think that it's always existed, but now we have media terms and labels for it, and now it's kind of cool to rant about it. So the word spreads, if you will. I believe it all comes down to an ability or disability or desire to engage with one another. It all boils down to being able to look one another in the eye, put down the phones, and communicate the old-fashioned way. So here's what I believe. To create what I call a more organic synergy, both sides, candidates and clients, employees, employers, can come together by being more authentic, more open, more honest, whatever word you want to use to one another. You're probably sitting there saying, great, what the hell does that mean? To me, it means that candidates need to speak from their heart when they go to an interview, not necessarily what he or she thinks the prospective employer wants to hear. Because believe me, if I am in touch with anything, it's employment trends. And the next great movement in employment will be to recognize that the applicants, especially talented millennials, have the control, have the power. So taking a heart-centered approach to your work will become more practical and more normal the more that we all use it. My advice is to stop being afraid to be oneself and to talk about being who we are and who we're trying to become through our work. If you start with that intention, I think you'll be able to feel your way into a better fit as opposed to overanalyzing it and end up with a better job. So getting in touch with your feelings is important in the job market, not just at home, not just in yoga class. I also think that changing or shifting your expectations around work will help a lot too. So what do I mean by that? I think millennials could expect to get what they want from boomers, from their employers, whether they're boomers or not, both in terms of the money that we offer and in alignment with their values. But they have to expect it. They have to expect that it's there. Expectations are really tricky. Take it from the old dude in the room. Some expectations will do you well to forget about. Those are the ones that perhaps your parents, your mentors, other older people you got to know put on you. If you take the expectations too seriously, you're playing into our hands, playing our game by our rules if you think that what we expect of you is all there is. Or that our expectations are based on some kind of eternal truth or eternal reality. That is not the case. You see, any job applicant, every employee needs to be held accountable once they commit to a company. That's the only way any of our businesses will work, that's for sure. But that's different than trying to live up to someone else's expectations of what you can become. So I say don't be stifled by someone else's expectations. I encourage you to get in touch with your dreams, visualize them over and over, and bring them to the workplace. Bring them to the interview table, bring them to the job. Don't be afraid to be in touch with them as you work. And now the other side. For those of you, the many executives in this room, many of those of you in this room that are in leadership positions, baby boomers or not, my message to you is that the approach we're taking to managing our troops may be flawed at times. Think about it this way. Think about the mixed messages we may have given these kids that we're managing. Seems to me that almost all the boomers I know taught our children, or tried to get in touch with themselves and at all costs to get what they want out of life. We tried to instill self-respect, self-confidence, self-awareness, maybe even self-love. But then we hire them and we try to manage them a different way. I hear millennials complain all the time about being treated like a number and not a valued team member. We ask them to do sometimes mundane, boring tasks, and they feel disconnected from the vision that they thought they were buying into. They're not sure that they're getting what they signed up for, if you will. And they know they have alternatives. And then they quit. And they look for a different parenting experience. And we don't want turnover. And we complain about turnover. And we wonder who caused it and how to fix it. Well, the answer is no one party caused it. No one party causes anything. We're all in this together. So to undo the disconnectedness, the friction, what I call the working clash, I'll use an Albert Einstein-ism. He once said, I love this, you cannot solve any problem using the same thoughts that created them. And I think a lot of the times we do. We just kind of dwell in the same approach. You cannot solve any problem using the same thoughts that created them. So we all have to shift our paradigm to get to the next level. The new school of thought I suggest that we adopt used to be called participative management. Now that's a term I doubt any of you have ever heard before. The only reason why I've heard of it is, believe it or not, I took a class in participative management 40 years ago. And it still applies today. Maybe that's why I get it. It's not to say that I've always used it, but I do get it. Now and forevermore, that same line of thinking is called servant leadership. Simon Sinek, in his great book, Leaders Eat Last, which I've got up here, sums up the essence of servant leadership in one great line. Sinek says, leadership is not a license to do less, it's a responsibility to do more. I'm not suggesting that any of the executives in this room or any of the clients I work with don't work hard. Believe me, I know they do. They all do. And I've tried to manage like an authoritarian too. I know it's our job to make the numbers, and we have to figure out how to do it. And if making more demands, applying more control isn't working, then why not try an alternative strategy? Believe me, I know and understand that we have to get production from our people. I know the pressure we're all under. I hear about that all the time too. But I think sometimes less is more. Even if our role models taught us to scream even louder and pound our fists even harder, that may not work anymore. And I especially don't think it works with millennials. One of the questions on that pop quiz is kind of astounding in terms of how many millennials will actually dominate the workforce just 6-7 years from now. So get ready if you're not already. As hard as it may be, as unnatural as it may feel, I think the more you or we empower our employees and not confine them, even accept their screw-ups and let everyone learn from them, the better our bottom line will be. It may not happen overnight, and anyone that knows me knows patience is not my forte. But there's a ton of evidence that exists to support better outcomes through a consistent practice of servant leadership. So I think it's a good idea we spend more time on teamwork, maybe less time on metrics and analytics. I hear a gulp or two. Really more time on creating and delivering messages, stories that our employees can adhere to, that will inspire them. I think we all crave a connection to the real purpose or cause that's at the essence of all of our companies. And there is that mission there, but we don't talk about it enough. Maybe that will bring us all together, result in less conflict, maybe less turnover, more cultural harmony. That's my message, and I'm sticking to it. One last line that I saw the other day. I guess I'll admit I saw it on a dating site. I love this line. I can't remember whose profile it was.
Oh, shit.
I think I loved the line. It actually, it's just a great message, I think, for all of us in the business world. Sort of, being able to connect our personal lives with our work lives. It says, the waves won't stop, but you can always learn how to surf. So, from there, let's bring up some industry experts to get some different perspectives, learn from some other people, get a feel for what's going on in the field, if you will. These questions that I've asked our experts to answer, they're really encouraged to have us think out of the box. There's no right or wrong answers, so don't take anything personally. I'm going to take my jacket off. And where'd Kelly go? There she is. Kelly Conrad's going to come out at the start. Mind having a seat there, young lady?
Yes, of course.
So, Kelly's a fascinating story, really, and I just met Kelly 4 weeks ago. Yeah, Kelly was a candidate that, very fortunately for us, we get, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 resumes a week, just sort of out of the blue. And it's, yeah. And it's really not out of the blue, it's because, I've just managed to show up every day for a lot of years. A lot of years. But it feels brand new today, I'll tell you that much. And, it's our job to sift through the resumes, make sure that if we see a candidate that could be a fit for one of our searches, or just someone we know is quote-unquote placeable, we get those people in front of us and try to make something happen. So that's how I met Kelly. I'm not sure exactly how you came to find me. You remember?
Google search.
There you go. All right, let's give Alex a big hand. There you go.
What did you search for?
Like recruiting firms, tech recruiting firms.
Dating site.
Full disclosure, found him on a dating site, linked to his profile,
Match.com. No, that's funny. Just, really, I'll give Alex a big kudo. I've had 4 or 5 SEO, whatever types of consultants work for me now over the years, ever since I knew what a website was. And believe me, I started way before there was a web. Internet is bad. Yeah, it's coming and going. I should get off. Yeah, but a couple years ago, I said to myself, all right, it all boils down to one thing. There's 4 words that my SEO guy needs to figure out how to get me exposed through. Colorado software sales recruiter.
Yeah.
Okay? Can anyone do that? Alex has done that. Okay. All right, so anyway, Kelly has a very successful track record working for a couple of different kinds of companies, most successfully with Cisco. And when I interviewed her, we obviously talked about her track record and about some opportunities I was working, and she since has kind of blown me off because she has enough interviews on her own. But nonetheless, I tend to talk about what's going on in my business and my life and about this event, and she just had the best answers and ideas about some of the things we were doing. So I invited her here, and here she is. The question I had for Kelly was, do you remember the question?
The challenges with working with millennials, or
What are some of the roadblocks you faced? Good thing I have this written down. Kelly's not prepared.
Typical millennial.
Roadblocks you faced or challenges you've encountered working for Gen X and or baby boomer executives within the truly great companies you've been employed by.
so as your typical millennial, I'm gonna have to change the question and answer a little
Sure.
bit. So
Go for it.
working for baby boomers and the Gen Xers, so the first thing I told Jordan when we first met, he was telling me this concept. I said, you definitely have to segregate baby boomers and Gen Xers. I found that there's a big difference between the two. Baby boomers have children who are millennials. So actually working for baby boomers has been generally very successful. They look at me as, someone that they want to help because, their kid could be in the same situation. My dad actually said to me one time, he was on a business trip, this guy said, hey, do you mind if, my dad was in procurement, do you mind if I bring this, kind of millennial in to meet with us? He's kind of, training, learning. My dad was like, of course I don't mind, my daughter's doing the same kind of program. So, and I found that, working for baby boomers, it was kind of that same mentality. They wanted to help. Where I found the challenges is not as much working for baby boomers or even Gen Xers, but it's the working with. So in my last 2 years, I'm now 8-9 years into my career, and I never really had an issue prior to the last 2 years. But now, when I'm on the same level, is when the craziness has started, and where I've had some really kind of crazy moments in the workplace. So one of my last gig at Cisco, I worked again on par, the same position. I was partnering with another Gen Xer, and it was a male, so he kind of said things, but didn't come right out and say it. But it was very much I don't like that we're on the same level and that kind of thing. But then my second job now, the woman just came right out and said it. She's like, we should not be on the same position. We should not have the same title. You have less experience. And that was when my first experience of, oh my gosh, they're threatened. This is an issue. And I think one of the challenges is, we're bombarded as millennials. We're not, dumb. We hear the chatter. We read the posts. I was on LinkedIn the other day, and there was this innocuous article about how software consumption models and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, the first comment was, well, if millennials would just work and show up at work, then this wouldn't be an issue. What are you talking about? It had like over 100 likes, and it was like, that has nothing to do with the article. That is like, you made the joke. Yeah, you made the joke about the groping. You can't be sexist, you can't be racist, but you can be ageist. It's like, that's totally fine. You can, on LinkedIn, on a public profile, trash people for their age, and but so I think the problem is millennials see that all the time. So we come in, we talked about this, we come in with that preconceived notion that this is what other people think of us, and then it's reinforced, and even if it's not, it's kind of in the back of our head, so even if it's not as extreme as the situation I had, it's kind of that underlying tension. And I think, so my very first job at Cisco, we actually had a generational awareness class. We did.
5 days.
So,
5 day class.
yeah, so, and they talked to us about, they're like, so these of the girls, and I had prior work experience and all this, but one of the girls raised her hand and she goes, so if we encounter this, like, should we say something? I was like, Lena, this isn't like if you see a fire, say something. Don't walk up to someone and be like, I think you're old. Do you want to talk about it? Like, no. But I think, but because of that, like, it's kind of, we don't say anything. I mean, again, like, to Lena's like, no, Lena, don't say anything. Like, don't walk up to that. I think we're going to have issues because you're old. But, like, at the same time, then we don't say anything. It's like, so the other extreme is we just don't ever talk about it, and it's the underlying. So, again, we don't need to talk about it. We don't need to, go up and be like, I think we're going to have differences because there's an age gap. But I think just understanding where each other are coming from and understanding kind of the major roadblocks. I mean, Sean and me were just talking about it, the stereotype I think that is somewhat true of millennials, we do need to feel purpose. We do need to understand what we're doing more so than other generations and just acknowledging those things and working through those things.
Yeah,
I think
taking down the roadblocks.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, and not perpetuating the stereotype, so.
Well, I really appreciate your time and your perspective, and just one last thing, because I remember we talked a little bit about this. You noticed in the workplace kind of a difference between that Gen Xer relationship and you versus the baby boomers. And you think that that's, again, kind of goes back to the parenting experience?
So I really do. I mean, I think the Gen Xers, it's more of a threatening thing. It's more of a, and they, for some reason, again, the baby boomers raised us, so they can't be that. I mean, they can maybe write smarts, but they can't hate us that much. Like, we're kids. But I mean, the Gen Xers, it's like, I feel like they kind of have this perspective that, we just got everything handed to us, and their lives, were so hard. And the reality is, I mean, I was telling someone, I graduated in 2009. I went to career fairs, people wouldn't make eye contact with me. I mean, my first job out of school, I made $30,000 a year and lived at home because I couldn't afford to not. I mean, so I have put in my time, but the Gen Xers, I think they're more so than anybody, they didn't see that. They don't see that millennials have put in their time. They have worked 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet and pay the exorbitant amount of rent that we spend. I mean, they don't, so I think that's kind of a difference, and to them it's very threatening, and they're not ready to exit the workforce. And then my just side snarky joke is, no one writes about them, so they're just upset.
So it's a little bit more competitive than
Yeah.
Give a letter, not a name.
Right. It's like no one, every article is about baby boomers and millennials, and there's birthdays, so no one cares. So that's my snarky joke. But,
All right, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it. This is for you.
Oh, thank you.
Dick Fowler, get your butt in here. We understand you're a father.
Is this the baby boomer part of the world?
Okay, Nicole DeLue, come on up. This is my second millennial. Now, unlike Kelly and I, Nicole and I have known each other for quite a while. And I've had the distinct pleasure of not only placing Nicole, but working with her as a client almost. So Nicole is an unusual millennial in that she's already accomplished great things in sales, has had management experience, has worked for a Denver startup where I did place her. Unfortunately, it was not the most successful Denver startup I've ever recruited for. However, she bounced back so dramatically that she's now with Amazon and moved to Seattle, which actually really pissed me off because she turned down an offer through us to do that. But showing my here she is. We're still dear friends. So the question I asked Nicole to prepare for, since she's worked for the huge guy now and before Tech Systems, another really Goliath company, and the startup, what's the most noticeable difference in the management style and the attributes of the folks you've worked for at the Denver-based SaaS startup as opposed to the industry giants that have employed you?
Yeah, so I thought a lot about this because I think it's a little bit tricky. If you would have asked me 6 months ago, I think I would have had a different answer.
And it's been about 6 months you've been at Amazon?
It's been about 6 months since I've been at Amazon, so I think my wheels like started going crazy about this, right? And I think that when you think of like a startup environment versus a very established company who has processes in place, I think that the differences in the environment dictate kind of how management works. Startups, right, you have a product that you may or may not have a market for. Most times in software, you're creating a market for it, right? And so, at least what I found at the startup, and I worked at a couple startups, but the startups I worked at, management, like the environment, is a little bit more ambiguous, right? We're learning together, we're creating together, we're finding solutions. There's no set process in place, like this is how this is done. At the end of the day, there is always going to be numbers, right? But those certainly change a lot more in startups. So I think the talent that startups attract, which is, as you know, is certainly my personality, like they want someone who likes the ambiguity, who's hungry, who innovators who want to create, right? So I think the management, when you want to hire those type of people, you have to be a little bit looser and let them color outside of the lines and help you figure things out, right? Because the pages haven't been written yet.
And you found that that was the case?
For the most part, I think, I mean, you're given a laptop, right? And it's like, here you go. That was my training, right? Here's your laptop. We have signed you up for your email, and I'm like, what am I selling again? I think I had looked at my partner at the time. We started at the same time, and we were both like, so, do you know what we're supposed to do? No direction, no, nothing. You have your weekly check-ins, but I loved 80% of that, right? Because you get to really own your role and create what the startup's doing, and you feel very invested in growing the company.
Do you feel more micromanaged now, or at least more structurally managed?
Yes and no, so I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So I would say the majority of the LIAS that I've worked for, right, the tech systems, the Robert Halfs, that's like a proven product, right? They've been in business, they have their market, and I think that's where you see a lot of the micromanagement. Like when you talk about numbers, numbers are everything, and it's not a quality versus quantity thing, which is, I think, a very frustrating thing for a millennial, right? Like if I can get 8 quality versus 15, just like why do I have to have the 15, like who created this 15 number? That's the micromanagement. You feel like over your shoulder every day, have to follow the process, have to ask for approvals to do anything creative outside of the norm. Now working for Amazon, which I never thought that I would go, you and I talked a lot about this, struggled with like going corporate from a recruiting sales perspective.
Yeah.
I never thought I would go. Amazon was the one company that intrigued me. I think Amazon's kind of an in-betweener when you think about it. The cool thing is with the Goliath that it is, I think whatever line of business that you're in, you truly feel like you're in a small startup within an enterprise company. It was the same thing. I mean, there was training, but it was, here's your laptop, like, go own your business, keep your clients happy, and it doesn't matter how I do things as long as I get my job done and I'm keeping all my clients happy. I don't have someone breathing down my back, I'm not following process X, Y, Z.
So it's a very innovative, but still very big company.
Very innovative, I think, and I think the reason for that, because I've been thinking about it a lot, because I never have seen an enterprise company work this way. Amazon hires basically based off leadership principles that are like innate within people. The interview process is unlike anything I've ever seen. And it's literally bringing a lot of these innovator, self-starter type of personalities together who have these values embodied in them, and the management is actually based off of those leadership principles, right? So someone who's not good with earning trust, like that's what your manager is working with you on, or someone who's not curious enough or digging into the data and really asking the questions why. versus managing based off of, you know, the typical process standards, here's metrics, here's what we need to be, so,
Cool.
yeah, it's interesting.
All right, good. Well, thank you so much for your time. We're gonna keep it moving because I know time-wise we're.
Thank you. I'll shake your hand.
Okay, now we're gonna flip it over quickly to the guys and girls that have done some hiring through me and or are doing some hiring. And I'm gonna bring up Chris Stites. So, Chris and I have also known each other for a long time.
Yes.
Indeed. Chris was my candidate way back when, and at the time was with J.D. Edwards, I believe.
Yeah.
And then it became PeopleSoft, and then Oracle, and Chris had a tremendously successful run there, and left and became the VP of Sales at was it American Monitoring Systems?
Alcohol monitoring system.
Alcohol Monitoring Systems.
Didn't work. I mean, it worked well.
You were not subject to the program. You just
Oh, I
ran.
volunteered. It was great. It was a good
Did
program.
they test you?
Every day.
Is that why you're not there anymore?
No. You wanted to see drinking, otherwise how would you know if it works?
Right.
Right? That was my role.
And then more recently, Chris has taken on the awesome responsibility of growing a very, very successful sales organization at Samba Safety out in the Tech Center, which is another, I wouldn't call it a startup, frankly, it was when we first started working together with it, but now, how many employees are you up to?
180 employees.
Wow.
Will be right at 50 million
Wow,
in revenue, and that's up from 7 million 4 years ago.
wow. It's amazing when you work with a good headhunter.
Somebody needs to take the credit.
We have had some successful sales placements there, but obviously
Yes.
Chris and his executive team has done an incredible job. All right, so the question I had for Chris from the management standpoint, what kind of ground rules do you believe are best instituted to create a corporate culture that both empowers employees and yet holds them accountable to your goals?
Yeah, so I think that's the hardest question, don't you? I mean, culture is so, no, I'm happy to discuss
Give
it
it a try.
because there's so many moving parts on culture. So everyone here works for a company that has a culture, and it's really hard to define. Right? What's your culture? Nobody can say in 2 sentences, here's our culture. And cultures change and evolve as companies grow and change. So a year and a half ago, we sold this business to a private equity company in Boston, and right away, the culture changed. Yeah. And then it was really our job on the management team to keep the culture as close to what we really want it to be and what got us to be attractive to buyers, keep it the same as we could. And so we said, okay, how do we define the culture so people will say, yeah, that's where I belong? And we define it this way: work hard, play hard, in that order. So everyone that works on my team, and product team, etc., all have other things they do besides work. And so that life balance there, we encourage that. We want to make sure that you have so many other things to do in life besides just show up to work. But when you're at work, kick ass. Kick ass. We have numbers, we have challenges, all that stuff that everyone else has. But if you make it more fun along the way, then people continue to show up and say, oh, this is a lot of work, but I'm really getting something out of it. One of the quotes, and I write this down because I knew I'd forget it, the exact wording, but we've talked about within our businesses around culture is, your culture is not a mission or vision statement, rather it's the worst behaviors you tolerate. And that's you think about that and you're like, wait a minute, all the marketing guys spend all this time here, HR spend all, we got all this, hey, here's our vision, mission, culture. No. If you look at when product, do they have to put something out by a certain date? Are they on time and on budget? Well, not this time, such and such, they have reasons why it didn't happen. Okay, you're tolerating that? Not that you should fire people, but what are you tolerating? And that changes what people expect of you, what you tolerate. So, How do you make a good culture? You set where the ground is. For us, work hard, play hard works. And when I interview people, which I'm interviewing people all the time, not just in sales, marketing, and channels, but I interview people in product, et cetera, to make sure they're a fit culturally. And people often ask, how do you define the culture? Simply, work hard, play hard, in that order. So that's a long answer, but I wanted to kind of set the stage. Is it?
It's a lot of context too. Appreciate
Can
it.
I ask you a question?
You can
I know
ask
that-
any question. I may or may not have an answer.
Yeah, but everybody that you put through your system, you have them do a cultural index.
Yes.
So how does that relate to work hard, play hard? Do you get that out of that index?
Yeah, so just let's get these guys involved in this, because this is a good topic. How many of you guys, the company you work at, had some type of personality assessment in hiring or why you're employed? Only like 4 or 5. Okay, Amazon is a yes?
No, but dig a bit and.
Yeah, take a big.
Well, yeah, of course that's the same, because it's the same
Yeah.
instrument. And so what we're looking for there is this instrument we use, and I've used it 3 companies and 2 nonprofits to flush out what a person's traits are. So the name Culture Index sounds like how they're gonna fit culturally. It actually doesn't measure if they're gonna fit in with the business. What it does, it says, how is this person wired? How are they wired with regards to autonomy, introvert, extrovert? What's their level of patience, high patience, low patience, attention to detail? Do they make decisions logically or emotionally? And so it looks at saying, this is how this person's wired. If they're wired right and they have skills and experiences, you can see that on the resume, then we bring them in an interview. And what we're trying to figure out there in the interview is, are you a fit culturally? Because we think your brain is wired to be a sales rep, a programmer, whatever the role is, and you have skills and experience, and you're gonna fit in with this place that says, work hard, play hard.
Cool.
Good question.
Oh, I've dealt with this.
Yeah, that's the recruiter's angle on, how, sort of on a tactical level, we can get in touch with culture. And your answer was really articulate on more of the strategic angle and the context. And it's,
Yeah, so everybody knows salespeople, and you all have a perspective on what a salesperson is, right? And some of them are really good ones if you're in sales, and some of them are really low if you're not in sales. It's pretty easy to figure out. But what really good salespeople do one thing: they solve problems in exchange for money. That's all they do. If they're not solving a problem, they're annoying, you don't return their calls. Seriously, no, true. You don't return their calls, you lie to them because you don't want to hurt their feelings, because salespeople are needy, right? So all these dynamics come in. But if the person's a good salesperson, they're solving real problems, you can't wait to get them back in, and you'll pay them. You'll pay them for their service.
I love that.
And so we look at salespeople. A lot of people are not wired to be either hunters or farmers, and they think every day they go to work, you go, I want to be a sales rep. And if you're wired more analytical, detail, high patience, right, things like that, you can be in sales for certain things, but most likely you're not going to be in sales and software unless you're selling a really technical solution. And so we flush out people that have a profile that's inverted to what we're looking for, and we don't waste their time on the interview, they don't waste our time. But every time I've gone against that model, I lose.
Great, thank you so much.
What else? That's it? Cool.
We're gonna keep moving so that we can all get on
Thanks,
to
Jordan.
other.
You signed this word even though you didn't write it? Couldn't get it.
Suzanne Healy, come on up. Suzanne is our last guest expert.
Yes.
And then we're gonna give you a chance to have some fun, maybe win some.
So I'm between the bar and the food.
Yeah, I'll get you a drink. What do you
Oh,
want?
all right. I hate being the last one.
Well, I apologize. So Suzanne is actually a vice president of sales, business development channels for pretty much still a startup software security company in the Denver Tech Center, where I was fortunate enough to place her a couple years ago. She has a tremendously successful background with big companies too, with Intuit, and if I remember correctly, like an MBA from some great university like Boston University or something like that. So she's also done it all and has tremendous wealth of experience at, you know, our community, if you will. You know, one of the things we don't talk a lot about and is, I think, under-recognized is there is so much talent in this marketplace. And Suzanne is a great representative of it. So I asked her a question because I know she's been managing millennials both at Intuit and a little bit at Intersect. What are some of the best outcomes and or surprises you've experienced as a hirer and manager of millennials in the companies that you've led? To get on the other side.
Right, so let me start by saying, you know, I own 3 of them, right? So I have 3 millennials myself, and so I feel like uniquely,
Children.
yes, children, yes, that I feel uniquely qualified, yes, to kind of share that, and so, you know, you bring your kids up, and I loved when you were talking about that, because, you know, you do. I mean, every child that walks into you, and we still call them the kids, right? Everyone that walks into your office is like, oh gosh, we gotta be great for them. But, you know, I think that the biggest challenge is grouping you all together. And it was so funny, I was telling my kids today, I'm like, you know, if I really were to look at what is going on in the industry, I think that you guys have had a raw deal in that everyone groups you together, like the millennials. No, you know what? 85% of the millennials are freaking awesome, right? They're brilliant. And they have a lot to share. There's 15% that really gives overarchingly a bad name, right? So those are the ones that are entitled. Those are the ones that walk in and say, well, you know, in my opinion, we should do it this way, and, you know, and don't really want to listen and just want to dictate, you know, because they're you know, they have read an article or they've read a blog or, you know, whatever. And so I do want to kind of separate that, and I think that that's probably the thing that I've learned to do is to separate those two, and because you know the ones that are going to be the problem children versus the ones that are really going to be part of the solution.
Is there any major sign that tips that off for you?
It's listening skills, right? I mean, it's listening skills, and I mean, and it's interesting because we were the baby boomers that raised them, right? So you know that, yeah, we were those helicopter parents that helped them along their way, and you were, you know, they were conditioned to having us around, right? And so when you kind of take that same approach, it's almost like a comfort level, right? And you're like, well, but wait a minute, but there's more. You know, there's more to me than that, right? And if you can, and I'm a true believer in service, you know, being a servant leader. You know, I was fortunate to work for Brad Smith at Intuit, who was the #3 best CEO, ranked this past week. And he was the epitome, and if anybody can follow him, he is a guy that, you know, you would follow to the ends of the earth. Because he made every single one of his thousands and thousands of employees feel like they were personally responsible for the success of that company. And so I you know, kind of took that upon myself in terms of my style, right? So when you come to me as a new employee, yeah, am I gonna mentally kind of, you know, pigeonhole you as, oh, you're the part of the 15%, not the 85. You try not to, but you do kind of know, and you try to bring them along, right? And just say, you know, this is how we're gonna work.
Yeah.
This is how we're gonna work. I'm not your mother. You know, I might appear to be, you know, but I really need you to embrace what we're trying to do here.
And you find if you give them that flexibility, they do adhere, they do live up to the expectations.
But it's interesting because I think they want the structure, you know, out of the gate. So, you know, the challenges of, you know, like I got a laptop, that's uncomfortable. So if you can kind of get beyond that part, like I think if we do a better job up front, we all would be more successful, right? So we don't do that, and so we go, okay, but you'll just figure it out. And that's when the coolness happens, is when they figure it out. But I do think that there's an opportunity for us to say, okay, maybe I'll give you your login too. Like not just your laptop, I'll give you your login and not make this that hard, right?
Tell me where your cube is.
Exactly. So there's opportunities for on both sides, right? But yeah, I think that the thing that I've learned the most is don't put everybody in the same bucket. Don't put baby boomers in the same bucket. Don't put millennials in the same bucket. You know, there's great baby boomer managers. There's extremely poor baby boomer managers. Same thing with millennials, right? So look at the people, figure out individually, like what's going to make them tick, and that's the other you know, again, when the coolness happens, is when you figure out, you know, what Johnny wants versus what Susie wants, and go, oh, wait, this is what motivates her, and this is what motivates him. You know, and so,
Great,
yeah.
thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up so we can play some more partying, but is Laurel around or is anybody else?
Of course it is.
Someone's going to get a chance to bring this.
Buddy Chris.
Follow Dom.
Whoa.
The real thing, baby. I think you're excluded from this contest. This is my son. Because there's one question that probably you would have a better feel for the answer than anybody else on the earth. So, you and your mother are excluded. Everybody else is included. And I'll wrap it up. Come on in.
Yeah, I got him.
Okay. Answer these questions.
I know. Hey.
Oh, gotcha.
Are you?
That's so weird, right?
Not be who, you know. I didn't cover any of them.
You're just supposed to have known this.
I might have given Are you everyone's attention? You can just put it on the table behind
Put it on the
you.
table behind you, please.
If anybody's foolish enough to pass theirs to me, go to the
No, you won't do that.
please.
Oh. Got it? Thank you. Do we need another?
All right, everybody in here, real quick. Lucas, come on. This is all I'm saying.
Does anyone need a quick horse?
All right. So, all right. I'll give a hint now because these should all be filled out by now.
They're not.
All right, the hint is that this is the 37th year that I've spent in this business. Okay? And I've never, ever had a year end like this. All right, everybody in here, real quick. And I attribute it to Sherry and Paul. And I want to